Okay. This, of course, is a map of the trek that the Judeans had to take when they were captured by the Babylonians, and you can see that it's a pretty long trip. It says 1,142 kilometers, which is what, 8 or 900 miles, I suppose. So, um, another disclaimer, whenever we take time off from our study, we didn't do it last week. It takes me some time to find my starting place again. And I've looked at and listened to our last study, or at least the one that's the latest date, and I think maybe we can get started back again. But tonight, right or wrong, or today, I want to begin discussing the time Judah was living in Babylon, but I've decided to go a different route. This was my intro before I decided to change. But we're going to stop short of Cyrus's invasion. We're going to hold that off for a week or two when he gave permission for the Jews and other citizens of other countries to return home. And you all know me, I'll be bouncing back and forth and so on. So here is, well, I got the closing prayer in there first. I had a timeline in here, don't know what happened to it, but it's gone. And so here's what I want to do. I want to kind of remind you all that the capture of Judah and Jerusalem occurred in three waves. The first wave came when King Jehoiakim rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar by refusing to pay tribute to Babylon. He was paying, and then got with the Egyptians and some other countries, and they decided, oh, we'll not do that. Well, Babylon didn't like that, and so Babylon invaded Judah, but it was a light invasion. It was not a real heavy invasion like the second one was. Maybe it was just to teach the Judeans a lesson and show them who's in charge. And although it says that Jerusalem was besieged, it was short-lived. And in this invasion, it seems that the goal of Nebuchadnezzar was to take the best and the brightest Jews back to Babylon. That's not what I've got here. This is a thing from Isaiah. And use them to learn the ways of Babylon, but also to have them teach the brightest Babylonians, because you've got the smartest from Judah working with the smartest from Babylon. Now, as a side note, in the first invasion, some of the brightest Jews were taken to Babylon, such as Daniel, and his name was changed to Belteshazzar. You all probably all remember that. And Hananiah, whose name was changed to Shadrach. Mishael, whose name was changed to Meshach. And Azariah, whose name was changed to Abednego. Now we all know the changed names, and I don't know how many of us know what their Hebrew names were before, but it was the goal of the king to assimilate these men into the customs of Babylon. And Jeremiah was not taken. And Michael's mentioned this a couple of times. Was there a note that just popped up? What did it say? Did I miss it?
Yeah, it was not important. It was a chat that wasn't germane to your subject matter.
Okay, all right. So Jeremiah, if you remember, was not taken because he was considered an ally of Babylon, because he had been preaching and prophesying for a long time to the leaders of Judah, saying, don't fight. This is of God. Go peacefully and things will go well for you. But if you don't go peacefully, you're not going to be happy about the results. And so he was considered a traitor by his people, because I don't know, it may have been a combination between what he was saying and the fact that he wasn't taken a prisoner. But he warned 5 kings to go along peacefully. And he said, this is of God. And the 5 kings, let me find my sheet. I apologize. I thought I had it in there. Well, I did have it in there, but Jeremiah preached to Josiah, Jehoaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, and Zedekiah. All of the last kings of Judah, he preached to, he prophesied to, and said, you need to go in and do it peacefully. So this was the first attack. And it was, like I say, it was a mild attack. It was just to go in and get some of the people. But they took this 1,100-kilometer trek, and many of them died on the way. And last time, or week before last, I played the song "By the Rivers of Babylon," which is Psalm 137, that the Babylonians, their captors, wanted them to sing uplifting songs on their way to Babylon. So I played that song, and I've got a song for you today too, which is hopefully it'll go over. But many of them died along the way. Okay, so now we're going to go back to Isaiah, and I again apologize for not having the timeline up there, but Isaiah, his prophecy was a prophecy. He was speaking 50 or 100 years before Judah was taken into captivity. So he was telling them what was going to happen. Same thing with Micah. And here's some of the things that Isaiah said, and it's a vision, okay, and it's 50 or so years before anything has happened. The vision of Isaiah, the son of Amoz, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of these kings: Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, the kings of Judah. And these, if you have your chart up, and again I apologize, these are before Manasseh, Ammon, Josiah, Jehoahaz. It was before all of them. So this is a prophecy. And he says, "Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for Yahweh has spoken. I've nourished, I've brought up children, and they've rebelled against me." Now, is that not a perfect description of the nation of Judah? The ox knows his owner, and the ass his master's crib. But Israel, speaking of Judah in this case, or it could be speaking of both, but Israel does not know. My people do not consider. They're not listening to me. They've abandoned me. They're worshiping Baal and all these other gods. And then he goes on and he says they're a sinful nation. They're laden with iniquity. They're evildoers, corrupters. They've forsaken Yahweh. They've provoked the Holy One of Israel to anger. They've gone backward. I gave them all of this good stuff, and I've given them my law, and they know that the law is to teach them how to live, how to treat their neighbor, how to worship God, and all of these. And he says, well, why should you be stricken anymore? Well, guess what? Because you keep revolting. You're getting worse and worse. Your head is sick. Your heart's faint. And from the bottom of your foot to the top of your head, you're a bunch of idiots. But wounds and bruises and sores, they've not been closed. You've done all of this stuff, and you've done nothing to revert back, and so on. Okay, so he goes on in verse 7, and he says, "Your country is desolate." Now, remember, this is a prophecy. your cities are burned with fire. Your land, your strangers devour it in your presence. It's desolate. It's overthrown by strangers, and so on. I mean, you all can read this. I don't have to read all of it. And in verse 9, he says that unless there'd been a small group of people that were obeying me, I would have wiped you all out. You would have been like Sodom and you would have been like Gomorrah. So what I wanted to do was to talk a little bit about what some of the prophets or preachers, if you will, said about the events leading up to and after Judah's captivity. And I think that not necessarily our group, because I think we've done a pretty good job, hopefully, for the last 2 years, understanding what was happening and that these prophets were living in the territory while these bad things were happening. These prophets were watching the northern tribes, and they were watching the southern tribes go off the deep end. And
Skip,
yeah, Jim.
I hate to interrupt, but could you go back and take a look at verse 8? I don't get those first two, the daughter of Zion is left as a cottage in a vineyard, as a lodge in a garden of cucumbers, and then as a besieged city. I guess I don't get it. That the cottage in a vineyard, the lodge in a garden of cucumbers, and then a besieged city. If it's meant to be an analogy, I don't get it.
They would have guards, little huts that they would guard the vegetables from, and that's what that means. The cottage, it really should be a little hut or something.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. That makes sense now. I mean, it just never made any sense to me at all.
Yeah, it's basically poetic language to describe a very tiny guardhouse in the middle of a field that's completely surrounded, which is exactly what happened to them, as we know from the history.
Yeah, and could it be a relation or a reference back to the where is it? That I left there's a few people that are listening to me, it could be a reference to that. So, okay, there's three ways to look at it. And that, there it is in verse 9, except the Lord of Yahweh of hosts had left us a very small remnant, we should have been as Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay. And then okay. And then, are you okay, Jim?
Yeah, I'm fine. Thanks. It helps. It was just sort of like a little thing in the middle of the field, and that's sort of how they were.
Okay, now I may be wrong here. I've been wrong before. You all caught me in many, many wrongnesses. But it seems to me that Christians who have not gone back and studied all of the history of what happened to, let's just talk about Judah in particular, when they read Jeremiah, when they read Daniel, when they read Ezekiel, they don't stop and think, hey, these guys were living through all of this mess that was going on. They're the ones that some of them got captured. Jeremiah ended up staying. There was a reason for that, but Daniel got taken into captivity. The three boys got taken into captivity. Ezekiel got taken the second time. He didn't get taken the first time. He got taken the second time, as I understand it. And so I think that if you haven't really studied the history of what's been going on, when you read these prophets, you don't really realize, oh, wait a minute. Daniel was right in the middle of this mess. Ezekiel was right in the middle. Ezekiel was down at the river digging ditches. Daniel had a better job. He was one of the first ones taken, and he got a pretty good job in the palace. Of course, he had some bad stuff happen to him, which we'll get to in the next week or two probably. But anyway, I think it's yeah.
Well, now that you brought that up and you spurned a thought, yeah, I think this study we've done the last 2 years has helped us understand, the context of what we've read for decades as far as the prophets go. And when you realize that the prophets, those that were given a message to give to a wayward people, when you consider what you just said, Skip, that they all suffered, they all went into captivity, they all went into bondage, they suffered right along with their countrymen. That should really dispel the notion that I hear so often within the Christian church at large, even within our own covenant community, that somehow God's going to spare us from the ravages of the sins of the nation around us. I hear that so often, and it worries me, because when you read the scriptures and you realize how consistent our Father is, it makes me worry for the roots that we need to have to endure what we're all about to go through in our modern age of a nation that's gone just as wicked and sinful as what we read of the nation of Israel and Judah. You're just trying to bring it into modern context there, that it does worry, because everybody runs to the Psalms and God's going to protect us. We're not going to have not a hair of our head is going to be harmed. And yet when you read what we've read the last 2 years and what you just said, Skip, you realize that no, God's servants end up going right through the mix of the crucible that the nation has to go through, which are the fulfillment of the terms of the covenant. No one escapes those things.
Yeah, it reminds me of the belief that a lot of people have about a rapture, that they're going to be taken up into the heavens and protected during the 3 years of tribulation, or 7 years, or how there's different ways that people look at it.
Yeah, place of safety, just where you're referencing.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we're going to get on those 747s and fly to Petra, which to me, Petra looks like a worse place to be than in the tribulation. And thinking of that, think what happened to Daniel. Daniel didn't lay down and pray to Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar's low life assistant said, "Hey, Nebi, look, this guy's not worshiping you." So he throws him in a lion's den to have him killed. And then the 3 boys get thrown in the fiery furnace. Now, yes, God did protect them, but that was a specific thing that would happen. The point is, they were having to go through it, and there wasn't any place of safety for these guys.
Well, I mean, Scripture, the New Testament tells me every single apostle except John was slaughtered.
Yeah.
And that was something that we were warned. I think the Scripture says that Yahweh Elohim not sparing His own Son. We're all been told by our Lord and Savior Himself that we were going to go through tribulation and persecution and these things, and somehow this fairy tale has erupted because we want to be positive that we're going to get spared from any of the things that we were told were going to happen. So that's something we need to keep in mind, because we do want to gravitate towards our God's going to save us. But what happens when, as Yahweh told Jeremiah, pray for these people no more, because my judgment, that's it, time's up, everyone out of the pool, as you like to say.
Yeah. So if you all have your timeline with you, And that's something I hope all of you will do. If you don't have a timeline with you all the time, holler at me. I will email you one. You can print it out. I keep mine right beside me all the time. Boy, and I'm telling you, if I didn't have it right beside me, I wouldn't. I wouldn't be able to relate to when these guys were. What was going on, who were the kings, what was happening in the country. So let me know if you don't have a timeline. So anyway, if you do have one and you look at the timeline, you'll see that Isaiah and Micah wrote much earlier than the prophets who lived through these last kings and into the captivity. There wasn't a prophet during the term of Manasseh, based on this timeline, who was the sorriest king that Judah ever had. Well, with the possible exception of Ahab's daughter, but so there were, I don't know if they didn't want to waste their time, if God didn't want to waste their time, or if Manasseh would have killed them, or what. But there weren't any prophets during that time. The next one that pops up is Zephaniah, but the biggie that pops up right above that is Jeremiah, and Jeremiah preached from the term of Josiah, who was a good king, all the way through and after King Zedekiah, which means that he spoke after the captivity, and we know that he was in the captivity. So I asked Michael for some drawings of these prophets, and I was going to put them in at certain places, but things got so messed up with my notes and my PowerPoint that I apologize I didn't get those in there. Thank you, Michael. I may get them in later on. So Isaiah had this vision about the future captivity of Judah. He says here in verse 3, chapter 3, he says, "Behold, Yahweh, the Yahweh of hosts, does take away from Jerusalem and Judah the stay and the staff." You're not going to be protected anymore, boys and girls. I'm taking away the whole stay of bread. I'm taking away the water. I'm taking away the mighty man, the man of war, the judge, the prophet, the prudent, the ancient. I'm taking away the captain of 50 and the honorable man and the counselor and the cunning artificer and the eloquent orator. I'm taking away all of this stuff. You're not going to hear or see, or eventually you're not going to get any food from any of that stuff. And let's see, I think he goes on. Yeah, he said, "I'll give children to be their princes, and babes will rule over them." And I think that's what we're talking about when we read about Jehoiakim and Jehoiachin and Zedekiah. And by the way, Zedekiah's name was not Zedekiah. It was changed from, and I don't think I have it written down. It was changed by Nebuchadnezzar. Somebody have it?
Yeah, just a quick note here on verse 4. We should all implicitly understand that verse to the soul of our being, because we're currently living in a nation that children are rulers and princes, and infants are ruling over us. Because just look at the state of things. That's very self-evident.
Yep, you're exactly right. Verse 5, "The people shall be oppressed." And I agree with Michael 100%. This is speaking of the nation of Judah, but I think that we're about to be living in it, or I don't know, maybe we're being oppressed now. It's kind of a light oppression, but everyone by another and everyone by his neighbor. The child shall behave himself proudly against the ancient. All of this woke stuff. The child shall behave himself proudly against the ancient, and the base against the honorable. When a man shall take hold of his brother of the house of his father and said, you have clothing, be our ruler. Let this ruin be under your hand. Anybody, hey, let's just elect anybody to be the leaders of this nation. And we have. Verse 7, in that day he shall swear, saying, I won't be a healer, for in my house is neither bread nor clothing. Don't make me a ruler of the people, for Jerusalem is ruined and Judah is fallen. I think we've hit part 1, but not part 2. Jerusalem is ruined. This country is ruined. And I may have just gotten us kicked off of something. I don't know. Judah's fallen because their tongue and their doings are against Yahweh, to provoke the eyes of his glory. Does that sound like what's going on in this country and the world? Okay. Now, this is Isaiah, who spoke 50 years, I think it was 50, before you had a prophet who was living through it. And the next prophet who was living through it was Jeremiah. And if you have your timeline, you'll see that. He began speaking in the term of Josiah, who was a good king. He was one of the next prophets of Judah. He prophesied during the reigns of Josiah, Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, and to Judah's last king, Zedekiah. Now, the first attack occurred during the reign of Jehoiakim, who was a son of Josiah. The next one, the really bad one, took place during the reign of Jehoiachin. This is when they laid siege on Jerusalem and built walls around walls, and built these siege machines, which were to throw stones, big heavy stones up to break the walls and all that kind of stuff. Jeremiah was the son of a priest, and he was a priest. I'm not sure he ever acted as a priest or did the job as a priest. I don't think he did, but he was active as a prophet for 50 years. And Isaiah had been dead for about 30 years before Jeremiah became active. And then we also see that Daniel began his prophecies during King Jehoiakim's reign, before they were taken into captivity, or as in Daniel's case, which was during the first invasion of Babylon. That was when they took all of the smart kids, the sharp kids, the bright ones. They took Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into Babylon to teach. They didn't take them in there to kill. And something that's interesting, I heard Ron say this. What did Hitler do? Hitler took all of the smart people and had them murdered. He didn't want any of the smart people. He hated the Jews so much that he captured them and had them murdered. Nebuchadnezzar was much smarter than Hitler. And he took them in and said, hey, come teach my people. You all know stuff. and my people know some stuff, and they'll teach you, and y'all can get together and come up with with some pretty good stuff. Now,
Note
yeah.
of history, and since you brought up Hitler, Stalin was the same way.
Yeah,
Matter of fact, Stalin didn't trust the Jews and did not trust the smart people that he thought that they would threaten his power. So he had them either put to death or sent to gulags. So when Stalin had a stroke, or I think he had a stroke, there was no doctors to save his life, and he died after 3 days because he had gotten rid of all the smart people. So yeah, Nebuchadnezzar was a lot smarter than the rulers that we've had over the last century and a half.
yeah. Nebuchadnezzar was not the nicest guy in the world, but he was a good king. He was a good king for his country. And if you remember your history of Babylon, it was built up as a beautiful, beautiful country. They had the if you remember, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which is one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. It was an absolutely beautiful place, and a lot of it was because of Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah, Gene said in a chat, they reminded that Pol Pot did the same thing that Hitler and Stalin did.
Yep.
Shows you that their modern rulers don't have the wisdom that even the ancients had, even if they were evil ancients like Nebuchadnezzar. There was no wisdom there. They decided, for power's sake, we're just going to kill and get rid of anybody that could possibly challenge or threaten my dominion.
Yeah, I'm not trying to brag on myself at all, but one of the things that I tried to do was to surround myself with people that were smarter than me, and that wasn't hard. At the bank, and I deferred to them, and I had the final say, but I had some really good people that were working there, and as a result, we didn't go under in the 80s, like about 70% of all of the savings loans in the United States did. 90% of the ones in Arkansas, and it wasn't because of me. It because I don't know, maybe some of Nebuchadnezzar had rubbed off on me, but I felt like the best thing I could do for the bank is to surround myself with people who were a lot smarter than me. And anyway, enough on that. Sorry.
I remember Ron Dart used to say that the reason they had to be carried off from Israel and Jerusalem was because it had gotten so corrupt in Judah that they sort of couldn't function. Some of the people did rather well, like Daniel becomes the chief executive of the country, and then when it comes time to leave 70 years later, a lot of them don't want to leave. I guess they're doing so well there.
Right. That is correct. When we get into studying about how the Judeans lived when they were in Babylon, we'll see exactly what you were just saying. And yeah, they were choked out in Judah because the king didn't want to listen to them. They particularly didn't want to listen to Jeremiah. He said, hey, look, go peacefully. Things will go well for you. But if you don't, guess what's going to happen? And guess what did happen? So down in verse in 7, he says, in that day, okay, that day, the day these three invasions of Judah by Babylon, in that day shall he swear, saying, I'm not going to be a healer, for in my house is neither bread nor clothing. Don't make me a ruler of the people. In verse 8, he goes on and he says, Jerusalem is ruined. Judah's fallen because their tongue and their doings are against Yahweh, to provoke the eyes of his glory. Okay, so now Jeremiah, I'm trying to take these guys a little, in sort of chronological order, although they were some at the same time. And Michael talked about this a few weeks ago, that Jeremiah was hated by the Judeans. He was hated by his family. He was hated by the kings. And so he was beaten, he was thrown in a cistern, he was stoned, I don't know, Michael, what else happened to him? It wasn't good.
Yeah, because he was trying to warn his people, as you said earlier, don't resist. This is a judgment from Yahweh Elohim, because if you resist, you're going to die on the spot. But if you go peaceably, you and your descendant, you'll live. And of course, he was accused of being a traitor because they wanted to fight. And God's like, no, the terms of the covenant are being invoked, and of course they declared him a traitor, an insurrectionist, if you will, and threw him in a cistern in mud, which he sank and almost drowned in it until he was pulled out and saved. So yeah, it was, you think about it for me. Here's a man who, from a very young age, was inspired to preach to his people, to save his nation from the fate that they were going to endure for their disobedience, because it was all written in advance. You just got to read the terms of the covenant in Deuteronomy to see that. And so he was trying desperately. I mean, Jeremiah, I think, was a patriot. He wanted to save his people, but they wouldn't listen to him at all. And so even though he does the work of Yahweh Elohim tirelessly and suffers for it, doesn't get any reward for it. You look at everything that happens to him, and it makes you, when you have the mindset that I've had, or that I do as an American, that what do they call it, the prosperity gospel, we're all infected with it to a degree. And here you had a servant of the Lord that suffered mightily by the hands of his own people that he wanted to save, and there was no physical reward for what he did. There was no, and we might get up and say, well, God, where's my blessing for being obedient? And of course, Jeremiah suffered the same fate that almost all the prophets did. And of course, Jesus Christ, our Savior, went through something very, very similar, trying to save the entirety of mankind, and we put him in death. Anyway, sorry, I'm starting go off on a stream of consciousness. I shouldn't do that. Go ahead, Skip. Sorry for interrupting.
That's quite all right. That is quite all right. Okay, so Jeremiah is considered a, not patriot, but a friend, if you will, of Babylon. And so he's left alone, except by his own people, which Michael just talked about. And he prophesied during the reigns of good King Josiah, bad King Jehoahaz, bad King Jehoiakim, bad King Jehoiachin, and Judah's last king, worst king, Jedediah. Jedediah? That's not right. Zedekiah. I put the J instead of a D in there. And so he was taken into the, he spoke in the first captivity of Judah in Babylon, but he didn't go. He didn't get taken. Okay. Next is Ezekiel. Now remember, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and a lot of other of the smartest and the best looking. They were without blemish. It almost sounds like they're picking out lambs for Passover, but they were without blemish and so on. Ezekiel goes in the second wave. Now, I can't help but think that Ezekiel might wonder why he wasn't taken in the first wave. I guess I wasn't good enough. I don't know. So you have them in order. Isaiah, who spoke 50 years earlier. Jeremiah, who spoke all during the period of leading up to and partially in the captivity. Daniel, who was big time in the captivity, and then Ezekiel. And as I said, I think a minute ago, Ezekiel ended up, down at the river digging ditches. Was apparently not considered one of the wise ones, but Jeremiah and Ezekiel were contemporary for a short time in Judah before Ezekiel was taken in that second wave, and they may have even known each other. We don't know. It doesn't really say. But Jeremiah, unlike Daniel and Ezekiel, was not captured and taken into Babylon. And I know I'm getting redundant there. Sorry. And because of his warnings to Judah to surrender, the Babylonians considered him an ally, and they left him in Jerusalem. Okay, so we're going to hear a little bit from Jeremiah now. The words of Jeremiah, and it talks about he was a priest and so on. And the word of Yahweh came to him in the days of Josiah, the good king, in the 13th year of his reign. And by the way, all of these years, they talk about the 3rd year and the 10th year and so on. You can't really square those up. They're approximate or ish, as Michael likes to say. And in verse 3, okay, it came in the days of Jehoiakim, first invasion, okay, the son of Josiah, the good king, until the 11th year of Zedekiah. That's the whole time that they were that Judah was being attacked, the 3 different waves. He spoke until the carrying away of Jerusalem captive in the 5th month, and he went with them. I'm sorry, this is Jeremiah. He didn't go with them. Then the word of Yahweh came to me, Jeremiah, saying, and sorry I didn't get this up where you can read it. Before I formed you, and we're aware there's 3 or 4 people that before they were born, they were inspired, if you will, by the Holy Spirit, or the Holy Spirit entered into them for them to do a job. He says, before you came out of the womb, I sanctified you and I ordained you a prophet to the nations. Then said I, oh Lord, behold, I can't speak. It sounds a little bit like Moses. I'm just a kid. But Yahweh said to me, don't say I'm a kid, because I got a job for you to do. Now, let me find this in my notes because I can't read it on there. We'll go to the next page. Verse 8. Don't be afraid of them, for I am with you. Doesn't it sound like the talk he gave to Moses? Then Yahweh put forth his hand and touched my mouth. And Yahweh said to me, I've put my words in your mouth. And I've set you over the nations, over the kingdoms, to root out, to pull down, to destroy, to throw down, to build, and to plant. I know the Worldwide Church of God had a big, here's what all that means. I don't know about any of that stuff. But verse 11 says, moreover, the word of Yahweh came to me and said, Jeremiah, what do you see? Well, I see the rod of an almond tree. This would be most likely talking about Aaron and the priesthood. Verse 12. Then Yahweh said to me, you've seen well, for I will hasten my word to perform it. Not getting into all that prophetic stuff. And the word of Yahweh came to me the second time. He said, and I'm going to skip some of this stuff. Remember, this is Jeremiah while he was in Judah. In verse 15, I'll call all the families of the kingdoms of the north, says Yahweh, and they'll come and they'll set everyone his throne at the entering of the gates of Jerusalem. And again, I'm bringing everybody against Judah. You guys aren't going to have a chance. And verse 16, I will utter my judgments against them, touching all their wickedness. You know, these guys are going down. Gird up your loins. Speak to them all that I command you, and don't be dismayed at their faces, because you're going to be saying things they don't want to hear. For behold, I have made you, Jeremiah, this day a defense city, and an iron pillar, and brazen walls. I'm giving you words that are very important that need to be said to these people. They're not going to listen to you. Verse 19, they will fight against you, but they won't prevail against you, for I am with you. Now, if you remember, Jeremiah was taken against his will down toward Egypt. I'm not sure if he went to Egypt. I think we mentioned that a couple of weeks ago. Michael said that he didn't think that they actually took him into Egypt, and he may very well be right. Then verse 38, if you will not go forth to the king of Babylon's princes, then shall this city be given into the hands of the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans are the Babylonians, and they'll burn it with fire, and you shall not escape out of their hands. And then he talks about Zedekiah. He says, I'm afraid of the Jews that are fallen to the Chaldeans, because I don't trust them. They're going to deliver me into their hands, and they're going to mock me. And Jeremiah said, they'll not deliver you if you obey the voice of the Lord, which I speak to you, so it shall be well to you, and your soul shall live. Well, guess what? He didn't obey. But if you refuse, I got to go down in my notes. I can't read that. Verse 21. But if you refuse, here's what's going to happen. And he tells him what's going to happen. And you know, you're going to die. Your eyes are going to put it. You're going to watch your children die. Your eyes are going to put out, and that's going to be the end of Jerusalem for 70 years. Now, Daniel, remember, was also a prophet during this period of time. And we get some really good information from Daniel, because he's right in the middle of it. He's taken into Babylon, and he works in the palace, and he had dreams and so on, and he was well thought of. And in Daniel 1, it says, eventually, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, remember, Jehoiakim is when the first wave hit, and when they took Daniel and the 3 boys. In the 3rd year, Nebuchadnezzar came down and besieged it. Now, this was a light siege. This was not the later siege that caused starvation. And Michael mentioned a few weeks ago how similar it was, that Assyria came in three stages, and in one of the stages they did a siege, and the people starved to death. And if you remember, they were eating their children, they were eating donkey dung and so on. And kind of the same thing happens in Judah. 3 waves. They were they were besieged, or they were sieged. Anyway, it says that Yahweh gave Jehoiakim into Nebuchadnezzar's hand, and he took some of the vessels of the house of God, the gold. They cut it in pieces so that they could carry it. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. Now, don't you know that irritated the Father and Christ? That they took the vessels out of God's holy temple?
I'd have to disagree with you on that note, Skip.
All right.
Well, I mean, yeah, obviously he'd be upset about it, but I think that Yahweh Elohim was a lot more upset because his own people had already defiled the temple. I mean, you look at what Athaliah did. I mean, you had sacrifices to Baal happening within the temple, within the Holy of Holies. I mean, so there was profanity happening by God's own people against the very furnishings that were intended to represent the throne room of the Most High. His own people had already defiled it, and here you have the nations taking the gold and things out of it to bring it into the temples of their God. Well, Judah had already done that with the Baals that they had worshipped. I guess that's the only point. I didn't want to say you were wrong, Skip. I just read that and I'm like, well, yeah, but his own people had done this themselves earlier, which is why the terms of the covenant were being invoked.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. They had the Asherah pole. They had statues of Baal. You know, you're exactly right. They
Well, I
had
mean,
turned the
yeah,
temple.
didn't they actually destroyed most of the temple themselves? Didn't Josiah have to rebuild? Didn't they have to rebuild and refurbish the temple of the Lord because it was in such a horrible state after all those years of occupation by Athaliah and all the Baal worship?
Yeah, Hezekiah did it first,
Okay, right.
and then Josiah did it later on. You know, it was interesting that Hezekiah rebuilt it. They found the They found the book of the law, or was that during Josiah's reign? But anyway, Hezekiah tore down the holy places of Baal, and the next king after after Hezekiah was Manasseh, the worst of the worst, and he made it. You know, he destroyed the temple, as you're saying, and then Josiah came along and he rebuilt it, and then the next kings tore it down again. I mean, it just, so you're right. You're right. It was already a mess. Uh, so, now whose gold did they take? Did they take the treasures of God, or the treasures of the Baals, or both? We don't know. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And the king spoke to the master of his eunuchs. Now, this is talking about Nebuchadnezzar. Spoke to the master of his eunuch. We all know what a eunuch is. It's a male that's been castrated. That he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom, and this is talking about Daniel, Meshach, Abednego, and other princely citizens, young, good looking, smart. He took them in, and like we said a minute ago, did exactly the opposite of what Pol Pot did, of what Hitler did, of what Stalin did, of what Italy, Mussolini did, and so on. And he brought in these guys that had understanding of science and had the ability to stand in the king's palace, whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. Isn't that interesting? Completely the opposite of the modern kings. And going all the way back to Egypt, what did the Pharaoh do? The Pharaoh recognized Joseph, and Joseph saved that nation, and he built that nation up. Now they misused their power and their authority, and they started mistreating God's people, and as a result, Moses came along, and God destroyed the nation, through Moses. But at least the Pharaoh knew, had the sense enough to use Joseph and build up the nation. In verse 5, it says the king appointed them. Here's where we get into the interesting thing about the food. The king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them, except it really didn't nourish them, for 3 years, that at the end they might stand before the king. Well, guess what? That wasn't working. These were unclean foods. Now, I don't know how much of them that Daniel and the boys and all of them had to eat, but you know they had to eat some of them. Now, among these were the children of Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. That's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It says, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave these names. He called Daniel Belteshazzar, and he called Hananiah Shadrach, Mishael Meshach, and Azariah he called him Abednego. Now here's where I'm going off the reservation. I'm going to play a song. I'm going to pause the recording if I can figure that out.
Hey, Skip, don't pause it. Just keep going.
You think I'm okay?
Either that or I'll edit it if we get a
Okay.
copy. Again, this will be on Rumble too. So
Okay. This one's kind of humorous, but yet it's talking about the three boys. There was a song written, and Ron mentions it. It's a Negro spiritual that made the name of these boys well known, and I thought I'd play a version of it. I'll get it going here in just a second. And I'm going to try to show you the lyrics at the same time because these guys are a little hard to understand. Come on. There we go.
Was three children from the land of Israel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, took a little trip to the land of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. He took a lot of gold and made him an idol. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Then he told everybody, when you heard the music of the cornet, oh yeah. He told everybody when you heard the music of the flute. Then he told everybody when you heard the music of the horn. Good God, then you got to bow down and worship an idol. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. But the children of Israel would not bow down. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. You couldn't fool them with the golden idol. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. I said you couldn't fool the children with the golden idol. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Then the king put the children in the fiery furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Then he heaped on the coal with red hot brimstone. Red God made it 7 times hotter than it ought to be. Even burned up the soldiers the king had put there. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. By Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Then my God sent down an angel, boy, he gave him a couple of wings. He went strutting down in the middle of the furnace and began to cool the flame. The children, they got so happy, they went strutting right through the fire, just laughing and talking about the power of the gospel. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. By Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Then old Nebuchadnezzar said, hey there, when he saw the power of the Lord. Then they had a big time in the land of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. By Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Okay, so there's my sense of humor. I don't know. Here's the lyrics. I tried to put them up at the same time. So let me ask you all a question. Do you like me throwing in stuff like that, or would you rather let's stay on course?
Seems good to me.
Yeah, I liked it. I liked Johnny Cash's song about Belshazzar.
Oh, I hadn't heard that one.
It sort of reminds me of it. It's one of his earliest songs.
Okay, well, if anybody didn't like it and doesn't want me to play things like that, send me a text. I won't put anybody on the spot right now. All right. Daniel 1:8-16. I just got one message. I liked it. Okay. All right. Daniel. Now remember, Daniel is in Babylon, and he's a captive, and that's what. And I may be wrong, but that's the way I started this. I think that many Christians who ignore the Old Testament, who ignore the history of what happened to the northern tribes and what happened to when I say ignore, I apologize. I mean, they don't do heavy studyings like we've done for the past couple of years. I think they really miss something, because they say in passing, or people say in passing, oh yeah, Daniel was in Babylon, but I mean we've built a pretty big introduction to that. So anyway, here's where Daniel tells the king, I'm not eating your unclean food. Daniel proposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. And I'm not sure. Okay. I'm not sure that what was wrong with the wine, but anyway, for whatever reason, Daniel wouldn't drink the wine. And he requested of the prince of the eunuchs. Now, this is the guy that's in charge of all of the staff in the king's palace. Now, we don't know whether Daniel was a eunuch or not. We don't have any idea. I've read, yes, he was, no, he wasn't. It doesn't really make any difference. So the prince of the eunuchs, who was in charge of the king's house, was who Daniel requested and said, hey, look, we're not going to eat that stuff anymore. And says God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. So the prince of the eunuchs really liked Daniel. I'm quite sure Daniel had taught him some stuff, and the prince of the eunuchs was like, yeah, you're my man. And so the prince of the eunuchs says, look, I'm scared to death of the king. He says you're supposed to eat this stuff. Why should he see your face as worse liking than the children which are of your sort? I don't know exactly what he means by that, except that Daniel had made a case, look, we'll be a lot healthier if we don't have to eat this garbage. And so you're gonna make it where the king's gonna remove my head from my body. And so Daniel said to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over the four of them, prove your servants, I prove you, 10 days. This is what Daniel said. Let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. I'm not sure what pulse is. I think it's vegetables. Um, 10 days was a relatively short period of time, but apparently, this food was pretty bad. And he said, let us eat veggies and drink water for 10 days and then look at us. And so he said, well, okay. And so verse 14, he considered and proved them 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, they appeared much more fair, much fatter in flesh than all the children which ate the regular food that the king gave them. And thus Melzar took away, he said, okay, I've learned my lesson. I'm going to give them veggies. I'm going to give them water. And we're going to see if it works out for everybody and not just you all. As for these 4 children, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom. And of course, we know Daniel had understanding and visions, and he interpreted some. And so at the end of the what?
Sorry, Erica had unmuted herself and was talking on the phone, and that's what we were hearing. I just
Oh,
muted her.
that's okay. That's okay. I've done it before. I had a football game on a couple of weeks ago in the background. I didn't know that the volume was on. Now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in and said, hey, look what's happened to these guys. And the king talked to them, and they couldn't find anybody that was smarter and more prepared to lead than these 4 guys, Daniel and the 3 boys. Therefore, they stood before the kings, and they answered every question that the king asked them, and he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in his realm. 10 times smarter. Okay, now we could stop here, or we could go on, and I'm kind of leaning toward stopping here. What do y'all think? Y'all want to go on? Because I've got the whole book of Lamentations in my notes here.
Oh boy. Well, if we could, I don't know if you want to pause. That's up to you, Skip. Whether you want to go on, I'm fine if you want to go on. However, I just out of curiosity, because I do not like the King James here at all. As a matter of fact, I actually am grown, I guess, distasteful of the King James when it comes to a lot of the Old Testament studies. I'm either preferring the Berean or the
NASB or
Yeah,
ESV.
yeah, the Jewish translation that you reference.
Yeah, I love that.
So hard to understand because again, I don't the King's English is I guess again, language being isn't perfect. It's just my own personal preference. But if you would permit me, I think what's interesting is compared to what you read, because you said you didn't know what something meant. I think in verse 9 or 11. So I'm just gonna read, if it's okay, this is from the Berean study. Beginning in verse 8, it says, Daniel made up his mind he would not defile himself by eating the king's food or wine. So he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself. Apparently the king was probably eating pork or unclean things that Daniel didn't want to eat. And so verse 9 says, so now God granted Daniel favor and compassion from the chief official, which, by the way, I prefer compared to what King James said. It just said something about the eunuch had sweet love or something, which could be totally misconstrued in this day and age. So Daniel had been given favor from the chief eunuch or official. But he said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your food and drink. For why should he see your faces looking thinner than those of other young men that are your age? you would endanger my head before the king. Verse 11 says, Then Daniel said to the steward whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Please test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given only vegetables to eat and water to drink, and then compare our appearances with those of these young men who were eating the royal food, and deal with your servants according to what you see. And so he consented to this and tested them for 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than all the young men who were eating the king's food. And so the steward continued to withhold their choice of food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. And so I like that translation a lot better, Skip. I just thank you for allowing me to read that. It makes more sense as an American to read that other than the the King's English.
I agree 100%. Here's what happens. When I'm copying and pasting scriptures, whatever, as a matter of fact, I'll just show you all. And we are going to stop here. But whenever, okay, I think you can see New King James, NASB, Complete Jewish. Those are the ones that I check, and whichever one is highlighted is where all my copies are coming from. And I try not to copy from the King James Version. And so in this case, that's what happened. Now, here's what I will do, because I agree with you 100%. I will go back to, if I can find it. There's the timeline, by the way, that I haven't been able to find. Okay, I will come back here and I will recopy all of those. Because I do think we need to go through Lamentations at this point, because I think it fits perfectly, because Jeremiah is in Jerusalem and he's going through the starvation and everything. And so he writes down what he sees. And by the way, I don't know if y'all can see this or not, but you can, if you can, you can see where my verbiage was cut off, which really caused me a problem today. And I don't know why it did that. But
The ability to put your cursor on the edge and make the window wider or not?
Yeah, I've tried everything under the sun. And
So this is, there you go, click and drag.
yeah, but see, it doesn't change that. It just makes the page bigger.
Try it. Let me see what it does.
See, it just makes it. So here's what I did.
I see.
Here's what I did though. I went orientation landscape and I got it all.
Okay.
Except I don't like printing out in landscape. It makes the, well, it turns 9 pages into 21.
That is irritating. Yeah, I normally have to just print out my notes rather than use a digital version, because it always, for whatever reason, just trying to do it digitally, we run into these problems all the time. So I just find it easier to print it out and have it rather than trying to look off my digital notes. So that's just me. Also, one other point, since we're talking about housekeeping, on your slides, I noticed that the white background you've got on there, you should be able to make that bigger rather than have it just where you can't read the words because they go off the edge of the page.
Yes.
Are you able-
I sometimes forget.
Oh, okay.
Like right here, I can go
Okay, so yeah, all right, good.
much bigger. And I,
Read them, and I'm like, wait a minute, did I only give him ones that were flattened, that he didn't have the ability to make that that white area bigger? Okay.
no, here's what I need to do. I need to go into my template, which is I've made a template out of all of these things you've sent. And I just need to take a handful of them, increase them to full page, and then duplicate slide and use those all the way through. I do need to do that. So that'll fix that problem. But I will also go now. I like the NASB version very well. So I agree with you 100% to go into the NASB on Lamentations instead of King James.
Skip,
Yeah.
I have a question for Michael real quickly. Michael,
No, now, Tommy, you can't ask Michael questions. This is my show.
I'm asking you if I can ask Michael a question, please.
Okay, that'll be fine.
All right. Goodness. That's not worthy of laughing at, Linda Sue. Okay. Anyway, Michael, I heard you refer to the Berean Study Bible and also the NASB, and I was looking at some weeks back at buying the Berean, and I thought, well, is this the same thing as the New American Standard? So are they the same or different? If I have the New American,
Yeah,
but
no, they're different actually.
well, I think I'm going to go ahead and get one of those with your recommendation. Since you mentioned it, I'm taking that as a recommendation of a sort.
Well, let me quantify the reason for it because you might change your mind. On my browser, I actually like when I do studies and things like that because it's more instant than having a physical copy in my lap. You know, Skip gifted me the Complete Jewish Bible, which I like a whole lot. But I use like Bible Hub, or I'll use a browser online that has multiple versions. And out of what's available, I do have a tendency to like the um, Berean Standard or the Berean Study simply because it's a little bit closer to the Complete Jewish Bible in English. I kind of like it that way. But I mean, some of these online browsers that have, get the NIV, New Living, English Standard, Berean Standard, King James, New King James, NAS, CSB, you get a whole bunch of them. I don't have the same software Skip does where he's got like 50 different translations at his fingertips. Mine is online. So this is just one of my personal preferences. It's available for me on a Mac, and I know you're on a Mac. And so I tend to like the Berean, but it is different than the American Standard or the Revised Standard, if that's what your question was.
All right, thank you. Yes, and sidebar, Skip affectionately, I guess, refers to my apple as a crab apple.
Right.
I've sanitized that a little bit, and by the way, some of the audio sometimes just went away. Not long, maybe 10 or 12 seconds, and I'm going, what? But I lost the audio sometimes. So since you're talking about tech stuff, that happened to me. Maybe it is my crab apple.
Was it during the song service or during the study, Tom?
I think it was during I'm sure it was during the whenever people were speaking. It was during Skip's speaking.
I don't know. That might be something at your end because I didn't.
I think it likely because no one else